We're heading straight to the heart of British culture. We're talking about all those fascinating quirks and customs that make the UK so unique.
And trust me, there are a lot more than you might think.
Oh, I believe it. Now, we think we should just address the elephant in the room right away.
Go on.
When you think about British culture, what's the first thing that pops into your head?
Probably their politeness.
Exactly. It's practically legendary.
And let's be honest, a little bit baffling to outsiders.
Yeah, like where do you even begin to understand it?
Right.
So let's start with the basics. Saying please and thank you. Our sources suggest that Brits use these phrases constantly in almost every situation. You think the bus driver, sure, that makes sense, but thanking an automated announcement,
Oh, yeah.
that's a new one for me.
It's one of those things you just have to experience to really get it, you know?
Okay, so help me out here. What's the cultural reason behind all this excessive politeness?
Well, it's not just about good manners. It's about acknowledging shared space and maintaining the sense of social harmony.
So even in those brief encounters, they're thinking about the bigger social picture.
Exactly. It's like this unspoken agreement to keep things running smoothly.
So it's almost like it's not just about being polite, it's about upholding a certain social order.
Yes, and this is especially clear when you look at the sacred British queue.
Oh, right. The queue. Our sources were very clear. Queue jumping is a huge no-no.
It's basically social suicide.
Wow, that's serious, huh?
Seriously. Cutting in line is like you're completely disrespecting someone's personal space.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal in British culture. Everyone in the queue has earned their spot.
It all goes back to that fairness and order you mentioned, right?
Precisely.
Yeah.
To really get it, you have to understand that British culture values personal space and indirect communication a lot.
So direct confrontation is a no-go.
You could say that.
Which brings us to another classic. The infamous British sorry. You bump into someone, you apologize. They bump into you, you apologize.
It's automatic.
Like, they're hardwired to say it.
There's less about admitting fault and more about smoothing over any potential awkwardness. Remember the whole aversion to confrontation thing?
Right.
Apologizing is a big part of that. It's all about maintaining that sense of politeness.
So instead of saying, hey, you spilled your drink on me, it's more like, oh, terribly sorry, old chap, didn't see you there. Let me buy you another.
It's a whole different way of handling those little social bumps in the road, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of fascinating that for a culture stereotyped as being so reserved,
Yeah,
they sure have a lot of ways to say they're sorry.
that's true. I suppose it's all part of the charm. But it can't all be apologies and cups of tea. According to our sources, the British sense of humor can be just as perplexing as their politeness.
Oh, absolutely. Speaking of perplexing, let's try to decode this uniquely British sense of humor, shall we? Our excerpts describe it as this amazing mix of dry wit and sarcasm, usually delivered with a completely straight face.
It's an art form, really.
It's like a secret language that only they know how to speak fluently.
And the key to understanding it is irony. Brits saying the opposite of what they mean. I'm intrigued. So, like, if it's pouring rain...
They might comment on the lovely weather.
Right. And with a straight face, that's the part that always gets me.
The deadpan delivery is key. It's like a challenge to the listener, you know?
Okay.
Like, are you in on the joke or are you going to take this literally?
And to really get it, you have to know what to look for.
It's all about those subtle cues, those shared cultural references.
Yeah.
You almost have to be immersed in British culture to fully appreciate it, I think.
So you're saying I need to brush up on my Monty Python?
It couldn't hurt. But on a more serious note, you've hit on something really important. Understanding British humor isn't just about recognizing a punchline. It's about understanding the context, the history, even the shared experiences that shape their way of looking at the world.
That makes sense. It's like the humor is just one piece of a much larger cultural puzzle.
Exactly. But don't worry, you don't need to be a scholar of British history to get in on the joke. A little curiosity goes a long way.
So for someone like me who's, let's say, a bit humor challenged, what's the best approach when navigating a conversation with a Brit? I don't want to accidentally laugh at the wrong time, or worse, miss a joke entirely.
I think the most important thing is to be a good sport.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to laugh at yourself. Embrace the awkwardness.
Oh, there's going to be awkwardness. I can guarantee that.
That's part of the fun. Brits appreciate someone who doesn't take themselves too seriously. And if you're unsure, just ask. They're usually happy to explain.
Okay, so embrace the awkward, ask questions, and maybe watch a few episodes of Faulty Towers before my next trip.
Sounds like a plan. But enough about humor for now, shall we? We've covered the art of politeness, the intricacies of queuing, the nuances of British humor. And what's a deep dive into British culture without a nice cuppa?
Ah, yes, tea. It's practically a national obsession, right?
More than just a drink, it's a ritual, a social lubricant, and a window into British history and etiquette.
Speaking of etiquette, our sources mentioned something about afternoon tea
Yeah.
and a duchess. There's a story there, isn't there?
There is. Legend has it that back in the 19th century, Anna, the Duchess of Bedford, started feeling a bit peckish in the late afternoon.
I feel you, Duchess. I feel you.
So, to tide her over until dinner, she started having tea and light snacks in her private chambers.
Smart lady. And thus, afternoon tea was born.
Precisely. But this wasn't just your average cuppa and biscuits. Oh no, this was a whole affair, complete with a three-tiered stand laden with finger sandwiches, scones with clotted cream and jam, and delicate pastries.
Now that's what I call a snack.
And the etiquette. Don't even get me started. There are rules for everything. How to hold your cup, how to stir your tea, even how to eat a scone. Which, by the way, is apparently a very serious matter.
I'm sensing a theme here. Leave it to the British to create an elaborate set of rules for even the simplest things.
But that's what makes it so fascinating. And let's be honest, a little bit charming too.
Okay, so I'm intrigued, but also slightly terrified. Give it to me straight. What are the absolute essentials I need to know to avoid a tea-related faux pas? Like, do I really need to worry about my pinky finger?
Well, first of all, relax. Even most Brits find some of these rules a bit over the top. While a formal afternoon tea does call for a bit of decorum, a casual cuppa is much more relaxed.
Okay, good to know. So when in doubt, observe and follow the lead of the locals.
Exactly. Whether you're enjoying a formal afternoon tea or a simple cuppa, the most important thing is to be present and savor the experience. It's an opportunity to connect with British culture on a deeper level, to slow down and appreciate the simple things in life.
I like that. But let's not forget, British culture is as diverse as its tea drinking habits. As interesting as all this is, it's only one part of a much larger story. Our sources mention a lot of regional variations within the UK. It's easy to forget sometimes that it's not just one big London-centric culture.
Absolutely. It's a common misconception that everyone speaks with that posh, received pronunciation we often hear in movies. In reality, it's only spoken by a tiny percentage of the population.
It's like everyone thinks Brits sound like they're straight out of Downton Abbey.
Right. But in reality, there are almost 40 different dialects across the UK.
40? Wow. That's incredible.
It is. And it makes traveling around the UK a truly fascinating experience. You never know what kind of linguistic surprises await you around each corner.
Speaking of surprises, our sources mention something called Cockney rhyming slang.
Ah, yes.
Care to give us an example? For those of us who haven't had the pleasure.
Well, how about this? Instead of saying stairs, a Cockney might say apples and pears.
Apples and pears.
Apples and pear stairs. Get it. It's not just rhyming. It's almost like a secret code.
It's fascinating. It's like each region has its own little linguistic quirks.
Absolutely. And these variations aren't just limited to vocabulary. Pronunciation and even grammar can change quite a bit depending on where you are.
So, like, if I learned standard British English, I might still be totally lost in some parts of the UK?
Oh, definitely. Take Liverpool, for instance. They have their own distinct accent, Scouse, made famous by, who else? The Beatles.
Of course. It's amazing how one city can have such a huge impact on the way a language evolves.
Isn't it? And it's not just about individual cities either. Wales, for example, has its own unique rhythm and melody to its English. It's quite beautiful to listen to.
It really makes you realize how much history and culture are packed into a language, doesn't it?
It does. It's a reminder that even within a relatively small country like the UK, there's an incredible amount of diversity and depth waiting to be discovered.
This has been fascinating. We've explored so much. British politeness, queuing etiquette, humor, tea, and now even regional dialects. It's incredible how much we've uncovered about British culture just by digging into these excerpts.
And we've only scratched the surface.
I know, it makes you want to hop on a plane and experience it all firsthand.
There's really no substitute for that, is there?
Not at all. So to our listeners, we leave you with this. What aspect of British culture surprised you the most today? And what are you most eager to discover for yourselves? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and until next time, happy travels.